So after a little bit of Googling on my part and doing some research, the reason for this is that the DataGridView does not understand complex types. It cannot iterate over complex types looking at property children and grandchildren. So in this case, what we need to do is we need to create a class that will take in a sales order item and act as basically like a wrapper that will expose the properties that we want at the surface level. So let me show you what that means. So I'm going to add this class to our form because it's only relevant to the form and getting the data grid to show correctly. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new folder first. I'm going to call this a view model folder because that's really what they are. They're models for the view. So I'm going to then right click again, choose add class. And I'm going to call this a DataGridView sales order item. Now that's a long name, but it's very specific because the purpose of this class is to generate the DataGridView sales order item. Now I'm going to make this public. And then I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to put some comments in here. I need a constructor that will take a sales order item. And the goal here is that I can pass in the sales order item and it will unpack that item into that flat or superficial looking data grid view version of it with just the 4 properties that I need. And then I need to create those properties. So I'm going to do my little prop string. I'm going to call this one product name, prop string unit price. And I'm sorry, this is not a string. This should be a float. I'll do prop uint quantity and prop float. And we can still call it line item total. Now, instead of using the inline initializers, what I want to do is I actually want to do a wrapper. So first thing I need is, let's actually do our constructor and then we'll come back and set up that wrapper. So we'll do a constructor. So if you do CTOR, double tab, it'll create the constructor for this class. Now your constructors are basically public methods that have no return type, and the name of the method must match the name of the class. So in this case, it's DataGridView sales order item. I want to take a parameter in order to create this, and that parameter is going to be a sales order item. And I'll just call it item. Now, we do not have a using statement, so we're getting the quick action menu. So we need to add the using statement for our quickly POS business models. Now, remember from last week's video, we took those and we actually created a class library project, and we moved them into that class library project. So now we have them in a separate place so that we can reuse them in different platforms as part of our N-tier or multi-tier architecture. All right. So now that we have this item here, we also need a private variable that represents that item. So I'm going to create or declare a private variable. So we'll do private sales order item. And with my private variables, I always like to put an underscore in the name at the beginning to ensure that I know visually, oh, that's a private and it's part of this class. So no one's going to see it except for this class itself. So I'll call it underscore sales order item. So now I can take that private and I can say in the constructor, this dot underscore sales order item equals this item. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that parameter that's being passed into the constructor and I'm storing it locally within my class in that private variable. Now I can come down to my properties and treat them as wrappers. So let's start with quantity just because it's the simpler of the ones. And instead of using the shorthand notation for the property, I'm actually going to do the full notation, and I want to make this property read only. So I only need the get. I don't need the set, just the get. So inside of this get, I'm going to return underscore sales order item dot quantity. And that'll return the quantity value. And then I'll do the same thing for the line item total. So again, we just need the get. And I will return underscore sales order item dot line item total. So you're starting to maybe see the idea here is that we have a copy of the sales order item. We're holding on to it internally inside of this wrapper class, this DataGridView version, and then we're expressing or presenting those properties so that they're all at the same top level, so we don't have to dig into them. So let's look at one where we have to kind of dig in to get it to the surface. So we'll do get for product name. And here we're going to return underscore sales order item dot product dot name. Now you'll see here that we're a layer deeper. So we always started with sales order item all 3 times, but the sales order item itself had a quantity and a line item total, but then it also had a product property, and that product has a property called name. So we needed to pull it out to the top level, and that's how we did it. So now we'll do get on unit price, and we'll return sales order item dot product dot unit price. And we can do this with any of the properties off of product, but if we want to raise them to the top and make them visible within that grid. All right, so we've done that piece now, and this now flattens out our sales order item. So to make it presentable, let's start by modifying the columns, and then I'll show you how we kind of mesh the two together. So I'm going to edit columns again. So product name will now just be a property called product name. And remember, we're going to start using the DataGridView sales order item class instead of what we were using before. And the same thing here, we'll just call it unit price. So now we need to jump into our code. So I'm going to go back to form1.cs. And right now what we're doing is we're taking order.items, and items is a list of sales order items. Now what we need to do instead is we need to create a list of DataGridView sales order items. So to do that work, we're going to end up saying list of DataGridView sales order item. And again, this class lives under a new namespace that we're not importing. So we'll drop down on our quick action and choose the using statement of CP first Windows app.viewModel. And I'm going to call this my DGV sales order items. I'm going to do a new one. So I declared the variable called DGV sales order items, which will hold a list of DataGridView sales order items. And then I'm going to say I need a new list. So I'm actually going to instantiate that list and create a new copy of it. So it's now a list, it's actual thing like a piece of paper, but it's empty. There's nothing inside. So now the next step will be, so this is creating the list, empty list. And now we need to load the sales order items into the list. And the way I'm going to do that is using a for each loop. Now I'm going to say for each sales order item, and I'm just going to shorthand it and call it an SOI in order.items. I want to create a new DataGridView sales order item, DGV SOI, shorthand. I'll say a new one. And you'll notice here that when I call new DataGridView sales order item, it's asking me to pass in a sales order item. So I'm going to pass in my SOI. So the for each loop is going through each one of the items in the order, and it's putting that particular item at that point in time in the list into SOI. So if there were 3 items in the list, so let's say that this is our list, then it does the first item, and it puts it in SOI. And then it puts the second item in SOI after it finishes running this code. And then it puts the third item in SOI after it finishes running through the body of this loop. So each time SOI represents whichever item in the list is currently being worked on. So once we have that item in there, we now have a DataGridView version of it. So this is create the DataGridView version of the sales order item. And then we can simply say here DGV sales order items, which is our list, add our DGV SOI object. So we're adding that item to the DataGridView sales order item list. And I'm actually going to rename this to say sales order item list. Now there's a rename quick action. We can drop down and it says you decided to change this, and I can click yes and it'll find all the references and rename them to be the same. So that's a nice little helper within Visual Studio. Now the last step is bind, I'm going to say DGV just because I don't want to type it all, sales order item list to the DataGridView. So instead of using the order items, I'm going to now use the DGV sales order item list. So I'll save that and let's hit start and see what happens. We'll click add item, add to order, and there we go. There's the basketball, $20, quantity of 1, subtotal of 20. Let's add another one. We'll add a baseball, and this time I'll do 2 of them. So there's the baseball for 15, quantity of 2, total is 30. Now, these aren't being formatted as money, so let's go back and see how we can fix that. So we'll jump back to the designer, right-click on the DataGridView, edit columns again. Let's look at the unit price. And what we want to do is scroll up to the top under Appearance and choose the default cell style and hit the little ellipse button. And then we want to look for the format under Behavior and hit the ellipse again. And what we can now choose is different formatting. And what I want to select is currency. So I'm going to choose currency, hit OK again, and then I'll go down. Oh, I actually set that on the wrong one. I set that on product name. So let's go back, delete that out. Unit price, set it C2, go to subtotal, again under behavior, double the ellipse, choose currency, hit OK again, and then we'll hit OK a third time, and let's rerun. And we will add an item. This time we'll add 3 basketballs. Add to order. Perfect. So there's the basketball, unit price shown as currency, the quantity, and the subtotal for that item. So that's how you would incorporate the DataGridView into your application to present data in a grid or tabular format so that you have a better control over the formatting, the positioning, and placement of your data in its columns.